Good morning and happy Holy Week. Today we're going to talk about the origins and the development of capitalism. Capitalism, of course, begins when labor becomes a commodity, something to be bought and sold on the open market. Over on page 136, the bottom paragraph there. The line for 4. All old-fashioned national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. Well, think of Irish linen. I once had some Irish linen handkerchiefs. I haven't had one in years. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations. Well, what do the Irish do when all of a sudden the national industry of Irish linen disappears? Because the weavers in England can produce handkerchiefs much faster and more efficiently. Also by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, wool sweaters from Scotland, but raw material drawn from the remotest regions. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. Think Coca-Cola. Think McDonald's. Think Starbucks. In place of old wants satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. In some years back, there was an announcement by an Italian publishing house that they were introducing a whole series of dictionaries of Italian dialects, which of course were disappearing because Italian was the Italian of the TV, and all those dialects from the Mezzogiorno, the southern part of Italy, were being lost. Universal interdependence of nations. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of McLuhan. What he called the global village. Okay. As in material, so also intellectual production. Well, we speak of intellectual property, which is quite an issue between us and China at the moment. Anyway, national one-sidedness, narrow-mindedness, etc., become more and more impossible. Well, we no longer have all these local literatures. There arises a world literature, right? Well, there's a Nobel Prize for literature, and it can be literature from any country, poets or novelists or whatever. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, right? Well, not only communication, but also transportation. Of course, at the moment, scratch transportation because nobody's traveling. Immensely facilitated means of communication. Well, think internet, huh? The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls. We used to speak of an iron curtain or a bamboo curtain. Well, the internet penetrates everything. Going down a little further, it compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst. That is, to become bourgeois themselves. And this includes not only various countries or various rural parts of countries. It also includes people, primitives, right? Or like Eskimos. Right? They have TV too. So, in a word, it creates a world after its own image. Well, we have a word for it now. Globalization. McLuhan's Global Village. And even rural parts of any country are going to be affected by this sort of thing. In fact, back in the, I think it was back in the 60s or 50s and 60s, there was a move to the family farm movement. Well, Marx would not have been impressed. He refers to the idiocy of rural life. Okay, moving right along. Bottom of page 137 there. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more going away with the scattered state of the population by means of production and of property. It has agglomerated population, centralized means of production. Well, the centralized means of production were in the United States in the Northeast. The factories were in the East. And that was true not only in the United States, but there was the industrial North in England, as also in Italy. I mean, the Milan and East, that's where industrial production was pretty much centralized. That's where the automobile factories around Torino. So it's, and that's true also in, to some extent in Germany. Well, no, that was kind of centralized more in the Ruhr Valley. Okay, or the Rhine Valley. Okay, over on page 138, bottom paragraph. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern bourgeois society, with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and of exchange, is like a sorcerer, right, a magician, who no longer able to control the power of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells. Think of the Sorcerer's Apprentice by the French composer Paul Dukas. Anyway, the question he's asking here is, who controls capitalism? You say, well, the particular capitalistic country controls capitalism. You say, oh no. There is what we should call, there's international capitalism, multinational corporations, right? Which are a conglomeration often of different manufacturing type entities. Or you could ask the same question, who owns capitalism? Is it the people? Who owns the capitalistic system in the United States? Is it the people? Well, there are joint stock companies, but those are largely owned and controlled by the capitalists. So who controls capitalism? One might say, well, it's international capitalism, the world market. Okay, moving right along on page 139 there. No, let's skip that. Over on page 144. The real limitation upon capitalist production is capital itself. Well, in other words, you need capital in order for the industrial production or capitalist production to produce. As we saw, you needed all that gold from California to fuel the industrialization of the United States. In the latter part of the 19th century. It is the fact that capital and its self-expansion are the beginning and end, the goal and the motive and aim of production. That production is regarded as production for capital. There's that famous statement by Alfred P. Sloan. He was chairman of the board of GM, right, General Motors. And he once famously said, GM is not in the business to make cars, it's in the business to make money. Spoken like a true capitalist. Of course, production for capital, instead of the means of production being considered simply as a means for extending conditions of human life for the benefit of the society of producers. Down a little further. These methods, the middle of that paragraph, these methods lead directly towards an unlimited expansion of production, towards production for its own sake. The economy must keep growing and producing and expanding. And why? Well, because it has to wipe out the debt that it took on in order to produce the expansion. So it has to keep expanding. And so capitalism never shrinks. It keeps getting, well, there can be fluctuations because, again, Marx is thoroughly aware, and this was his contribution to economic theory, that there are cycles, there are business cycles which no one has any control over. Not the particular, not the Fed, not central banks of different countries, and certainly not the World Bank. Nobody has control of it. The society can, the Fed can exercise a certain relative amount of control relative to the economy as it functions in the United States by controlling interest rates. It represents at the same time a perpetual contradiction between this historical task and the social relations of production that is established. Well, another member of GM was, of course, Engine Charlie. Okay. And Engine Charlie put it rather nicely. What's good for GM is good for the US of A. Right? There was a problem. And when GM is not in the business to make cars, but to make money, they tend not to make good cars, which of course caused a certain problem in the life of the American automotive industry, when all of a sudden these cheaper imports and better automobiles came in from Japan, right? So and indeed during the Obama era, the United States was forced to bail out the automotive industries. Chrysler was bailed out twice, GM at least once. Ford didn't get bailed out, but You might find that somewhat surprising that a Democrat, and therefore a progressive, a liberal like Obama, should have bailed out the capitalist, but he saw the number of jobs that would be lost if the automotive industry went under. And so remember, he was educated in good capitalist school. Good capitalist schools. Okay, over on page 149. Property in its present form is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. Okay? What is capital? It's a social power. Well, when Marx uses the word social, it has a very strong economic tinge to it. Capital is not a personal, it is a social power. When unions were formed, right, in order to obtain for the workmen a better share of the, shall we say, the excess, the surplus value, in other words, the profit that the capitalists normally got entirely. Remember, there was also the capitalists counteracted the unions with the National Association of Manufacturers. So capital had a way of talking too. And we saw that already when we were talking about the extension of the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, to corporations that they could make whatever, according to Citizens United, the Supreme Court's rather questionable decision, that they could make whatever contributions they like to political campaigns and or PACs or parties, whatever. Okay, moving right along. Over on page 153, about the sixth or seventh line there. The cooperative factories furnish the proof that the capitalist has become just as superfluous as a functionary in production as he himself, in his highest developed form, finds the large landowner superfluous. After all, what does the capitalist produce? The capitalist produces capital. Capital is not a product. It's what is used to make product. So Marx is making the same point that Hegel made when he was talking about the master-slave relationship. The master who had the slave by his labor produce from nature what the master desired or needed. The master became alienated from nature. Well, similarly, the capitalist becomes alienated from the whole business of production, right? Well, in fact, what's going to happen is he's going to, as we'll see in a couple pages later, he's going to appoint people to run the corporation or the manufacturing entity or the factory or whatever. Let's take a look at that over. I think that's over on, where is it? I think I lost it. Okay, to the extent that the labor of the capitalist is not purely capitalistic one, arising from the process of production and ceasing with capital itself, to the extent that it is not limited to the function of exploiting the labor of others. Well, the capitalist is, well, you have part of capitalism is the joint stock company, right? And of course, that's either owned or certainly controlled by capital rather than by labor. Although you might have labor unions investing strongly in the stock market, the ordinary workman does not own stock, and so does not really participate in the process. Okay, over on page 156, this surplus labor. The surplus labor is represented by a surplus value, and the surplus value is embodied in the surplus product. Okay. Surplus labor generally, in the sense of the quantity of labor beyond that required to satisfy existing needs, there must always be. Well, remember, there was exchange value. Okay, that was what you could purchase with the labor power that was generated. So, and surplus value, that's what the workman lived on. And then, of course, that's exchange value. In other words, what you get when you sell the product, basically. Okay. There must always be. That's, of course, surplus value. And, of course, we're referring to surplus value. Surplus value, that goes to the capitalist. Okay? Okay, he goes on to say, but in the capitalist system, as in the slave system, it has an antagonistic form and is complemented by the complete idleness of a section of the society, right? In other words, what does the capitalist do? The capitalist, or someone who owns stock, he sits at home and clips the coupons from his stock dividends. Okay? So capitalism produces the idleness of a section of that's the capitalist is, he's non-productive, right? What does the capitalist do? More capital. Well, capital is not a product. Although it was for Alfred P. Sloan and Engine Charlie, or Alfred P. Sloan, remember. What does GM is not in existence to produce cars, but to produce money. And one might say the same thing for banks, right? What are banks in business for? The bank is in business to lend money on yes, but they charge interest. The bank also is in business to make money, even though it doesn't actually make the money. That's the U.S. Treasury. Okay, most writers who have attacked Adam Smith's theory of productive and unproductive labor regard consumption as the necessary stimulus to production. Well, remember, even from Marx, if you produce a product, people will buy it. Production creates demand. However, in more modern terms, you need advertising. Right? Of course, advertising is a part of the capitalist system. Okay, and employers who live upon revenues and unproductive workers are as being just as productive workers themselves, because they extend the limits of material consumption and consequently okay. what he's saying there is the duty of the consumer in a consumer economy is to consume. There are, of course, a little further, the middle of that bottom paragraph, he makes a swipe at the clergy and religion, which Marx tends to do. Remember, religion is the opium of the people. What the people are given in order to desensitize them to the misery and wretched lives that they're forced to live. Okay, so increase the national, a few sinecures in the state and rich livings in the church. But for these unproductive workers, the clergy, whose services are calculated among the expenses of the idle rich, all have this in common, that while producing only immaterial products, they consume material products. The immaterial products presumably are sermons. However, in order to support them and their families in the manner to which they have become accustomed, the clergy also consume. And okay, I think I'm getting tired, so it must be almost time to quit. And we'll see you on Wednesday.